But yes, occasionally I am known to smash.
Sardonyx has arrived! Sardonyx is the combination of Garnet and Pearl, and Garnet decides it is best to form her to destroy the communication hub, which Peridot has repaired. Last time, Sugilite did this task, but it caused a whole bunch of trouble for everybody. So this time we get to see the last fusion without Steven of the gems, Sardonyx. One of the most hilarious aspects of this show when it comes to visual comedy is Pearl's facial expressions, and this episode delivers another fantastic one when Pearl gets asked to fuse. And the fusion dance that ensues, oh man, this is probably my favorite fusion dance thus far. Just so elegant and fun to watch, with just the right amount of risque. And so the rice ball head finally shows herself, Sardonyx. She has multiple eyes and multiple limbs as most of the other fusions we've seen, showing she is not a perfect joining of two gems. Sardonyx is especially interesting though in that she has a segmented and articulated torso, so her upper body can spin independently of her lower body, which actually is really awesome and should create all these unique attack combinations, and some that she does show later as she destroys the communication hub. So Sardonyx is described as the careful option when Garnet chooses this fusion route. Careful is not a word that comes to my mind when I saw the act Sardonyx puts on. Relative to Sugilite, pretty much anything else can be considered careful. But Sardonyx is basically a wild magician. She has tons of dramatic flair, she's very pompous, laughs at her own jokes. These characteristics seem a bit unpredictable and possibly detrimental in a real battle, but she was just destroying a communication hub and there was no immediate threat to anybody, so maybe she does take on a more serious persona and could actually be considered careful when danger is at hand. So post-fusion, Pearl is just jubilant. She has this emotional high, and even Garnet is uncharacteristically happy and lets out a bellow. This emotional high leads Pearl to want to fuse more, and she actually sabotages the entire crystal gems and their effort to catch Peridot by continuing to repair the communication hub using Peridot's salvaged pod. This episode further explores Pearl's character flaws, and it takes it to a new extreme. I think this is probably the worst thing Pearl has done so far. I still remember the early episodes when Pearl was this really goody two-shoes character and was by the book, very strict, and I would have never imagined the series took her into this direction, where we see all this emotional trauma and emotional baggage she carries from when Rose was alive. She was deeply flawed before Rose even disappeared, and I just love exploring her flaws. Some people may get upset and get kind of fed up with seeing Pearl screw up over and over and over. I like it. I think it makes for a much more interesting character than does a static one that has relatively few flaws. Steven and Amethyst eventually catch Pearl in the act, and Steven tries to think of any possible reason why Pearl's actions might be beneficial. Steven still has tons of faith in Pearl, even though he's seen her bad side already and experienced it personally and actually helped her overcome some of her struggles, but he still doesn't think she would be doing this out of selfish intent. Amethyst's behavior in this episode, though, it's awesome. I absolutely love Amethyst here because I think she steals the show. The primary events don't have anything to do with her, but her reaction and her responses to everything around her are just awesome, and I think Amethyst develops a ton throughout this episode. When she discovers what Pearl is doing, she realizes immediately what's happening, but she doesn't tell this information to Steven. She doesn't take glee in this discovery, getting one up on Pearl, and she doesn't get angry. She just gets very disappointed. And this is even more amazing because, as we saw earlier in the episode, she was very bummed out that she didn't get to fuse. She stayed silent and annoyed as Sardonyx came out, and Sardonyx was making all these jabs and jokes that is basically rubbing Amethyst's face in it that she didn't get to fuse. And Amethyst's feelings of disappointment and annoyance, they quickly turn into feelings of abandonment, loneliness, and uselessness as she starts to wonder whether she'll ever fuse again into Sugilite, because what is the use of this fusion that gets out of hand and becomes a threat to everyone? She has this angsty song about wanting to fuse, but it has a deeper nuance to it because she is wondering what is her future role in the crystal gems, and will she get to help everyone in the future? So yes, the fact that Amethyst just is silently disappointed and harbors these feelings to herself for a little while upon the discovery of what Pearl has been doing, That is a very mature and a very adult action, and I could not see Amethyst from the early episodes when this show first started doing that. I think it signals very strong character development, even though it's sort of on the back burner compared to Pearl and Garnet in this episode. In fact, it's not even Amethyst that reveals Pearl's actions. Steven is the one who shouts out that Pearl has to confess. And it goes even further than that. Amethyst defends Pearl when Garnet gets angry. Amethyst has empathy for Pearl and relates to Pearl's feelings of wanting to be stronger and wanting to feel like something more. I absolutely adore the actions of Amethyst in this episode, and I think that's my favorite part of this episode. Our girl's maturing and growing up before our very eyes. So the blatant reason the episode gives for Pearl's actions is that Pearl wants to feel stronger. She wants to feel like something more. In this sense, she is using Garnet for her own personal gain. Now, I think that's not quite all there is to it. There really does seem to be this emotional high you get from fusion. It almost seems to be like a drug. I assume the dopamine goes crazy during and post-fusion, and as Garnet says, this is an experience. It's an experience that is very enjoyable. So I do think there's this addicting feature to fusion, and not only can it be argued to be a drug-like high, you also basically abandon your old individuality and your old autonomy to form this new existence. It seems like the ultimate form of escapism. I'm reminded of the film Being John Malkovich, where everybody wants to escape their daily lives to be in the head of John Malkovich and experience what life is like for him. Well, fusion is basically this. You are becoming a new person, and you see the world around you in slightly different ways. And arguably, you are a stronger, better person than before. So yeah, I can see the allure to fusion, and I can see how somebody with a damaged mind and, a really weak inner being that puts on a strong front, somebody would really be susceptible to the emotional highs that fusion brings. So I don't think this action that Pearl performed is at all out of character. I think it is very in character for Pearl, and knowing all we know about her from her past experiences, this seems like a logical step. Garnet is just furious at Pearl. I think she shows more emotion than she ever has before. This is also very understandable and very in line with Garnet's character, who sees fusion as incredibly intimate and personal, and she completely feels used and betrayed by Pearl's actions. More so than a normal gem would, because Garnet is basically in fusion all the time. For Garnet, fusion is the love between Ruby and Sapphire. It is very sensible for her to be as enraged as she is. This is one time where I think Garnet's future vision failure is actually really well implemented into the plot. Future vision does take some effort, and you have to follow the different routes that different actions can take to figure out what can possibly happen in the future. So what Garnet was doing was she was using future vision to try and find Peridot. She was not exploring all the other potential possibilities, and it wouldn't occur to her to suspect her own teammates and sense selfish intent in her own teammates and use future vision to explore what this, could lead to. So I think that's brilliant that Garnet is completely blindsided by Pearl's selfish actions. So Garnet basically ends up strong-arming Amethyst into forming Sugalite to destroy the communication tower for the final time. And the music in this scene is just astounding. It's eargasming. Oh my goodness, this scene. The music just makes it. And it's not just about the destruction of the hub. It's about Pearl's realization of the consequences of her actions. The close-up on Pearl's face as we get this music that cuts deep to the core. Oh, I just loved it. It was incredible. And the episode wraps up with Pearl and Garnet not forgiving each other. This is actually, I think, the first time where in Steven Universe an emotional conflict between characters has not been resolved by the end of the episode. This is the first conflict that's going to span multiple episodes, and that's great. In the Crime Breakfast Friends TV show, the characters forgive each other, but in reality, although Steven Universe is still a cartoon, things aren't always so simple. Crime Breakfast Friends, by the way, oh my goodness, that was the most blatant foreshadowing ever. That was so obvious. Pearl says,
Why don't we do that more often?
and then we see the scene transition to Pear crying on the television.
Why did you lie to me?
I didn't mean to.
Oh, Pear. I'd forgive her. Wouldn't you?
Basically, this is Garnet not, enjoying the TV show. She's there to spend time with Steven, but she doesn't like the TV show, so her grunt is sort of her just not being amused at what she's watching, but in a way it's also basically saying that Garnet would not forgive Pear. And, add L to Pear, it's Pearl. It's so obvious. I missed it. This went over my head. I didn't see the rest of the episode coming, but, once the events unfolded, it became so incredibly obvious that this was some of the most blatant foreshadowing ever. And I'm pretty sure Spoon and Pear, they even have, I think, the same voice actors as Garnet and Pearl. It's just, oh my goodness. I don't know how I missed this, but I missed it. So as you can tell by how much I've talked about this episode, I think it was just awesome. 2 big thumbs up. What a fantastic way to start Steven Bomb 3. Just this explosion of feels, explosion of character development. As I was saying, Amethyst, I think, is maturing before our very eyes. And then all this additional stuff with Pearl's character flaws. And Garnet, for the first time, being very emotional. This is all very new ground for Steven Universe. And I give very high praise to this episode. It rocked.